You're looking at China's biggest trade fair, the Canton Fair. But this year, it's almost a ghost town. More sellers than buyers. Booths sitting empty. Container after container, stacked up with nowhere to go. Down south in Guangdong, another plastic factory just shut its doors last week. One of hundreds that used to pump out goods for American buyers. Now, piles of unsold inventory. Production lines dead silent. Workers lined up outside, hoping for scraps, hoping for any job. At the ports of Shanghai, it's the same story. Cargo ships waiting at anchor. Flights canceled. Bookings for containers to the US down by 45%. Air freight routes between America and China nearly frozen. So the big question is this: what happened to the so-called world's factory? How did China, the global manufacturing powerhouse, end up here? No bombs dropped. No soldiers crossed the line. This was done with tariffs. The shutdowns didn't come with a bang. They came quietly, one by one. Factories in China, once running 24 hours a day, are now sitting dark. Conveyor belts stopped. Lights off. Workers sent home, told there's nothing left to do. In Guangdong, a company that used to export 300,000 pet cages a year to the US, gone bankrupt. $4 million lost. Employees unpaid. But this isn't just one factory. This is happening across the board. Container bookings from China to the United States have collapsed, down 45%. Cargo ships are floating idle at sea. Dock workers are left standing around with nothing to load. The port of Los Angeles, usually packed with Chinese goods, is expecting 1/3 fewer arrivals this month. 20 vessels canceled. That's over 250,000 containers stuck offshore, with nowhere to dock. It's not just ocean freight. Air cargo is in free fall too. Orders for air shipments from China to the US are down by 30 to 50%. Flights between China and America, routes that once buzzed with business deals, are now nearly shut down. Xiao Li, a Chinese exporter in Guangdong, told local media he had 100,000 smart speakers ready to ship to the US this spring. But after the tariffs hit, every single order was canceled. The goods are now sitting in a warehouse collecting dust. Stuck, dead weight. And every day they sit there, he burns through more cash on storage fees. This is the domino effect. Factories can't sell. Workers get laid off. Inventories pile up. Cash flow dries up. Companies that once thrived on steady US orders are now fighting just to survive. Some are moving products to bonded warehouses in Canada, praying the policy will shift. Others are cutting prices, slashing wages, burning through reserves, doing whatever it takes just to stay afloat. But here's the truth. This isn't a glitch. This isn't bad luck. This is what happens when the biggest buyer walks away. The American consumer was the lifeline of China's export machine. From toys to electronics, from plastics to chemicals, it all depended on US demand. And now, with a 145% tariff wall, that demand is gone. In private, some Chinese factory owners are admitting the obvious. One manufacturer near Shenzhen told a local reporter off the record, "Without the American market, we're dead." And the pain is spreading. It's not just the exporters. It's the truck drivers, the port workers, the factory crews. It's the families behind every small and mid-sized business that fed off this machine. Their livelihoods, their futures, all tied to a system that just hit a brick wall. This isn't just an economic slowdown. It's a choke point, a chain reaction. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. This collapse didn't happen by chance. It was triggered by design. And this is just the beginning. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't some market fluctuation. This was a move planned, calculated, and executed. The 145% tariff wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was the first domino in a chain reaction designed to choke the lifeline of China's export economy. For decades, American companies outsourced their production to China, chasing cheaper labor and bigger profits. China became the world's factory, but that factory was always built on one key assumption: access to the US market. So when President Trump signed off on the highest tariff wall in modern trade history, he didn't just raise prices. He locked the door. And China's exporters, the same ones who had undercut American workers, flooded the market with cheap goods, and crushed U.S. factories, suddenly found themselves on the outside looking in. But here's the twist. It wasn't just the tariff percentage that did the damage. It was the rules behind the wall. The U.S. didn't just slap on a 145% tax and walk away. The Trump administration moved to close every loophole in the book. Certificate of origin, under full review. Transshipping through Vietnam or Mexico. Inspections tightened. Claims of assembled elsewhere? Scrutinized. Every attempt to dodge the tariffs blocked. Every back door shut. One logistics manager at a major freight company told Bloomberg off the record, they tried moving shipments through Canada, through Southeast Asia, but customs caught on fast. Nothing's getting through. This is not just a tax policy. It's economic warfare. But this time, America didn't need bombs or tanks. Just paperwork. Just enforcement. And it's working. The supply chain that China spent decades building wasn't designed to handle this kind of blockade. Most of their factories aren't flexible. Production lines are fixed, built for scale, not for agility. You can't just flip a switch and move a factory from Shenzhen to Hanoi overnight. Tooling, materials, certification, logistics, it all takes time, money, and stability. And right now, China has none of those things. The result? Products pile up. Orders vanish. Factories freeze. Workers get sent home. And here's the quiet part no one in Beijing wants to say out loud. They didn't think America had the guts to pull this off. For years, China played the long game, dumping cheap steel, flooding the world with plastic and electronics, manipulating their currency, stealing intellectual property, all while betting that Washington would never have the political will to fight back. But they were wrong. The Trump tariffs weren't just about trade. They were about leverage, about sending a message that America would no longer bankroll the system that sold out its own workers. And while the headlines talk about supply chains and export numbers, here's what it really means on the ground. Tens of thousands of Chinese workers laid off, empty shipping yards, factories shuttered, and the so-called world's factory grinding to a halt. Because when the buyer walks away, the seller has nothing left. This is what happens when the doors close. And the question now isn't how bad it will get for China. The real question is, how long can they hold on? This was not a glitch in the system. This was not bad luck. It was a deliberate move made in America. The 145% tariff was never just about raising prices. It was about shutting down the engine of China's export machine, cutting off the oxygen, choking the lifeline. But here's the part they didn't see coming. It wasn't just the number. It was how the door was slammed shut and the locks double-checked. For years, Chinese exporters played the same game. Ship the goods through Vietnam, relabel them in Mexico, assemble parts in Malaysia, always looking for the back door, always one step ahead of the rules. Not this time. The Trump administration didn't just raise tariffs. They rewrote the playbook. Certificates of origin, under investigation, reshipment through third countries, flagged and inspected, claims of made elsewhere, put under the microscope, every gap, every loophole, closed. One shipping executive in Hong Kong admitted privately, nothing's getting through. The U.S. customs checks are airtight. Even the small shipments are getting flagged. And that's the difference. Tariffs alone don't collapse a system. But when you build a wall and lock every escape hatch, the system suffocates. China's supply chain wasn't built for this. Their factories are massive, rigid, and locked into specific parts, materials, and contracts. These are not nimble operations. You can't simply pack up a Shenzhen line and restart it in Saigon next week. It doesn't work like that. Tooling, equipment, suppliers, certifications, shipping lanes, everything is locked in place, no way out. The exporters who bet their future on the American market, they are now trapped in a dead zone. Finished goods sitting in warehouses, cash frozen in unsold inventory, workers sent home with no paychecks. This was the real strategy behind the tariff war. Not just punishment, but control. America didn't need warships or missiles, just enforcement, just the courage to say no more. For decades, China dumped steel, plastics, electronics, and chemicals into the US market, killing American jobs, gutting American factories. They stole technology, copied designs, manipulated their currency, and played the victim while doing it. They assumed America would never fight back. They assumed wrong, because this time the buyer slammed the door, and China is stuck on the other side with no good options left. In private meetings, some Chinese manufacturers are already admitting the truth. One senior manager at a major plastics exporter told a reporter quietly, off the record, "We're finished if the Americans hold this line. There's no other market big enough to replace them." And they're right. Europe won't take that volume. Southeast Asia can't absorb it. Even China's domestic market is slowing down, hammered by youth unemployment and a collapsing real estate bubble. The world's factory was always built on one simple truth: America buys, China sells. But now, the buyer has walked away, and the seller is left holding the bag. This is what happens when the door is locked. This is what happens when the trap closes. The numbers tell the story, but behind the numbers are the people, the businesses, the entrepreneurs who thought they could ride the wave forever. Today, in factories across China, production lines sit still. Not because of a labor strike, not because of a shortage of materials, but because the orders simply aren't coming. Take Lao Wang, the owner of a mid-sized export factory in Zhejiang. Last year, his company shipped over 300,000 pet cages to the United States. Steady business, reliable clients, a healthy profit. He had plans to expand, hire more workers, invest in automation. Then the tariffs hit. Now, his warehouse is overflowing with unsold cages. Every shipment canceled. $4 million gone. Workers unpaid. Expansion plans dead. And Lao Wang is not alone. According to data from container tracking service Vision, bookings for 20-foot containers on the China-US route have dropped by 45% year-on-year. Let that sink in. Nearly half of the trade volume wiped out. Freight giant Hapag-Lloyd reports that 30% of its China export orders have been canceled. Sea Intelligence analysis shows nearly 400,000 fewer TEUs, 20-foot container equivalents, on Asia-North America routes in just 4 weeks. And it's not stopping. Xiao Li, the electronics exporter in Guangdong, found himself in the same nightmare. 100,000 smart speakers, ready to ship, canceled. No buyers, no market. He had no choice but to move the goods into a bonded warehouse in Canada, bleeding money every day just to keep them in storage. Desperate, some exporters are cutting prices to the bone, selling at a loss just to keep cash flowing, just to hang on to their ranking on platforms like Amazon. But for many, it's already too late. In the plastic sector alone, dozens of factories have shut down since the tariffs were enforced. Orders gone, machines silenced. The chain reaction ripples down through every link of the supply line. Mold makers, packaging suppliers, transport companies, freight forwarders, every one of them feeling the squeeze. In private meetings, logistics managers are blunt. We're drowning in inventory. There's no way to move it. No one's buying. And for the smaller players, the mom-and-pop manufacturers, the family-owned operations, this is more than a downturn. This is extinction. Genpark, a Chinese export consulting firm, surveyed hundreds of manufacturers. The result? Over 50% expect their performance to fall this year. 1 in 5 expects their sales to crash by at least 30 to 70%. Nearly 10% fear a total wipeout, a drop of over 100%. Some are already throwing in the towel. Factory floors that once buzzed with activity are now eerily quiet. The smell of melted plastic and machine oil replaced by silence. Supervisors pacing between idle machines. Empty loading docks. Trucks sitting parked, going nowhere. The picture is the same across sectors. Toy makers, furniture exporters, chemical suppliers, electronics assembly lines. Every part of the export machine built on one assumption: America will keep buying. But now the lifeline is cut, and the machine is seizing up. Even large state-owned firms aren't immune. Three of China's biggest airlines, Air China, China Southern, and China Eastern, have reported 5 straight years of losses. Their international routes, especially to the United States, are bleeding cash. Ryan Peterson, CEO of logistics giant Flexport, put it plainly, in the 3 weeks after the tariffs took effect, ocean container bookings from China to the US fell by more than 60%. 60%. In 3 weeks. This is not a slow leak. This is a rupture. And the impact is devastating. No market big enough to replace America. No quick fix to reroute supply chains. No silver bullet to save these companies from the hard truth. They bet on the American buyer. They built their factories for the American market. Now that buyer is gone, and the house of cards is falling. It starts with a shutdown. The machines stop. The orders dry up. The warehouse fills with unsold goods. But the real cost, the human cost, comes next. Across China's industrial zones, the parking lots outside the factories are empty. Not because the shifts haven't started, but because there are no shifts at all. Hundreds of thousands of workers, laid off, sent home, no severance, no notice, just a message, no work today, maybe not tomorrow. In Shenzhen, one of the most important manufacturing hubs in the world, entire dormitories are half vacant. Migrant workers who came from the countryside chasing factory jobs are now packing their bags, heading home broke, hoping for something better somewhere else. But there is no somewhere else. Because the problem is not one factory. It's the entire system. The electronics sector, once the pride of China's manufacturing rise, is bleeding jobs. The plastics sector, shrinking fast. Toy makers, furniture producers, chemical plants, all cutting headcount, all freezing hiring. A recent survey from Genpark revealed the brutal math. More than 50% of exporters expect sharp declines this year. And every drop in sales means layoffs, fewer shifts, fewer paychecks. At one speaker assembly plant in Dongguan, the production floor used to run 3 shifts, day, night, and weekend. Now it's down to 1 shift, and even that is part-time. Half the crew has already been let go. One line worker, a 29-year-old from Sichuan province, shared her story with local media. We came here to work, to save money for our families back home. But now there's no work. I've been sitting in the dorm for 2 months. Waiting. But for what? Another group of workers staged a protest outside a factory in Foshan last month, demanding unpaid wages. Videos show them holding banners, shouting at security guards. But the factory boss was nowhere to be found. The gates stayed locked. This is the other side of the tariff war. The side Beijing doesn't show you on state TV. Factory owners may lose money, but the workers, they lose everything. There's no unemployment safety net for most of these people. No backup plan. When the factories close, they're on their own. The numbers are staggering. According to data from China's National Bureau of Statistics, the youth unemployment rate has soared past 20%, and that's just the official number. On the ground, many believe the real figure is far higher. College graduates are flooding the job market, only to find the factory jobs they used to rely on gone. Meanwhile, older workers, those who've spent decades on the line, are being pushed out with nowhere else to go. The ripple effects reach deep into the countryside. Migrant workers send money home every month. Money that feeds families, pays for school fees, covers medical bills for aging parents. When that money stops, entire villages feel the pain. In Hunan province, one farmer told a local reporter, "My son worked in the city. He used to send money every month. Now he's back home. No job, no money. We're just trying to hold on." The dream of China's working class was simple. Go to the city, work hard, build a better life. But now that dream is breaking. And here's the brutal irony. For years, these same factories were the ones undercutting American workers, shipping cheap goods across the Pacific, taking jobs away from Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Now, with the tariff wall in place, the tables have turned. The system that hollowed out American towns is now collapsing at its core. The workers who helped build the world's factory are now stuck, trapped in a machine that no longer runs. But Beijing won't talk about this. They won't show you the dorm rooms, half empty, the protests outside factory gates, the families scraping by on borrowed cash. Because the truth cuts too deep. When the orders stop, the factories shut down. When the factories shut down, the workers suffer. And behind every statistic is a person, family, a life turned upside down. This is not just an economic story. It's a human one. And it's far from over. The factory closes its doors. Workers go home. But the damage doesn't stop there. When the production lines stop, the pain spreads far beyond the factory gates. It hits the neighborhoods, the small shops, the restaurants and grocery stores that rely on those workers as customers. It hits the landlords, the bus drivers, the street vendors. This is the chain reaction Beijing doesn't want the world to see. Across China's industrial heartlands, once bustling towns are turning quiet. Streets that used to hum with the sound of scooters, lunch breaks, and shift changes now sit empty. Small businesses, bakeries, noodle shops, market stalls are closing down. With no workers, there are no customers. In Dongguan, one small landlord shared with local reporters, "Half my tenants left last month. They just packed up and went home. They couldn't pay rent. Now my building is almost empty." The collapse of China's export engine isn't just an economic event. It's a social rupture. Unemployment, especially among the young, is hitting record highs. College graduates with no jobs. Skilled factory hands with nowhere to turn. A generation raised on the promise of opportunity, now staring down a dead end. Youth unemployment has officially topped 20%. But many experts believe the real number could be far worse. Because in China, if you stop looking for work, you disappear from the statistics. And as frustration grows, so does unrest. Over the past 6 months, reports of scattered protests have surfaced across factory towns. Workers demanding back pay, demonstrations outside government offices, local authorities rushing to keep things quiet, to keep these stories off social media. But the tension is there, boiling just beneath the surface. Beijing knows the danger, because they've seen it before. Social unrest, driven by unemployment and hopelessness, has always been the nightmare scenario for the Chinese Communist Party. The government has tried to spin the narrative, talking about domestic demand, talking about self-reliance. But the math doesn't work. China's middle class isn't big enough and isn't rich enough to absorb the collapse of exports to the US. The loss is too big, the hole too deep. And here's the global twist. While China scrambles, America is moving on. US manufacturers are shifting supply chains out of China, moving production to Vietnam, India, Mexico, even bringing some jobs back home. American companies, once hooked on cheap Chinese labor, are now diversifying. Not just because of cost, but because of risk. Risk exposed by this trade war. China is finding out the hard way. When you build your economy around one buyer, you hand that buyer the power to break you. And America is using that power. Not with bombs, not with missiles, but with tariffs, with enforcement, with a strategy that hits at the core of China's strength, its role as the world's factory. And Beijing is running out of options. They've quietly started cutting tariffs on some US goods, semiconductors, medical equipment, aerospace parts. A quiet admission that they can't fully decouple, that they need these imports to keep their industries running. But these concessions aren't enough to stop the bleeding, because the supply chains are already shifting. The global map is being redrawn, and trust, once broken, is hard to win back. The truth is, the world saw what happens when one country tries to dominate global production. And the world is choosing not to go back to that. So as America locks the door, as China scrambles to hold on, the cracks are widening. Factories shut, workers idle, towns hollowed out, protests bubbling. The Made in China label, once a symbol of dominance, now hangs like a question mark. And behind closed doors, even China's leadership knows, this isn't just a trade dispute, it's a reckoning. The headlines keep calling it a trade war. But what's happening here looks a lot more like checkmate. No bombs dropped, no bullets fired. Just one strategic move: slam the door shut and watch the factory lights go out. China spent decades building its power on one fragile truth: America buys, China sells. But now, that chain is broken. Millions of containers sit idle. Millions of workers left with nothing. And the world's factory, locked out of the game it once dominated. But here's the real question. Is this collapse just the cost of doing business? Or is it the beginning of something bigger, the unraveling of China's entire rise? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And stay tuned, because this fight is far from over.